welcome to the stage, Mr. Chris Bauer!
So depending on your spiritual temperament, a certain aspect of this is going to be clearly untrue. I died waiting for an Italian beef sandwich to arrive. I'd also ordered a small, no large, no an extra large pizza with garlic, Italian sausage, and mushrooms. But I wasn't waiting for that. That was for later. I lived in a crap shack apartment above a Mexican family who made wonderful smelling food every day. They did not ever invite me to eat and were alarmed by the amount of food I had delivered. In Spanish, they yelled out to me when the delivery guy was on the porch, "Something in Spanish." They only spoke to me when water dripped into their apartment. This only happened twice. First, when my toilet overflowed, and secondly, when I drunkenly tripped into the bathroom and braced myself by falling into the water tank, breaking it into many pieces. Water poured onto the floor, and I watched it, not knowing what to do. I started crying because I was drunk, wet, and overwhelmed. My downstairs neighbors came up and shut off the water valve, and they yelled at me, "Something in Spanish!" I did not commit suicide, though I'd actually contemplated suicide once and was also over a sandwich. I grew up in the North Shore of Chicago in a town called Wilmette, famous for its wealth, its great schools, and being the canvas upon which John Hughes painted his prolific yet ultimately mediocre masterpieces. My parents produced one child who lived up to their expectations, my brother Michael. I was supposed to be a girl, but instead I was born a boy who grew up and wanted to be an NHL hockey player, and later, when I discovered that I was most talented at was lying, a writer. 8 years after graduating from high school, I found myself the supervisor of a catering event in Wilmette. I had quickly risen in the catering ranks because I was white and had many years of experience charming North Shore mothers whose daughters I was trying to have sex with. When I mentioned to clients that I also grew up in Wilmette, they did not ask me questions about it. It made them uncomfortable, alarmed. They worried for their own kids, doubted their futures. When I unsolicitedly told them about my other endeavors, that I was not a new chair graduate doing only this for a living, they took a deep breath and immediately felt better about their daughter at Berkeley that was not currently returning their calls. It was a simple, fairly simple party and in a house owned by a wealthy but supposedly modest family in Wilmette. It was a ranch house that had sprawling features, including sections connected by outdoor walkways. Since it was winter, they had tents built over the outdoor walkways and rented gas heaters that poorly heated the sections that were actually outdoors. The client hoped that people would spend most of their time standing not in their house, but in the heated spaces that were not in their house. She had us put the sandwich buffets in the tented areas only, and also asked us not to serve people who were inside. They imagined that people would walk through the sections of the house, admire them, and then go to the tented areas and discuss the perils of being so rich. The problem is that most people, when they are cold, prefer not to be. So everyone crammed in the house and sat on couches that were not meant for sitting, and rested wine glasses on antique wooden tables not meant for resting. The client's husband, during the walk through the house, showed the staff an antique gun collection in one of his offices. Each gun was displayed in a glass case with a handwritten description underneath. On another part of the tour, he showed the staff his antique bullet collection. The bullets were displayed in a glass case as if they were butterflies. When I asked the client, the man's wife, how things were going, she only had one thing to say. People were dropping the salmon sandwich on her white carpets. And she was concerned because of the beats.
Rightly so.
The open-faced smoked salmon sandwich in order from bottom to top. Rye bread, smoked salmon, shaved fennel, red onions, beets. The sandwich, like all 4 sandwiches being served that evening, required 1 adult hand to pick up and about 3 bites to complete. They were presented on plates set on small tables next to neatly swirled paper napkins. I suggested that we could omit the beets from future sandwiches. The idea that was rejected. The client said, "But the beets make the sandwich." While we spoke, another guest dropped a sandwich right in front of us. She was probably like 90, and she was clearly not ready for the sandwich. The average age of the guest was probably 70 years old. They were too shaky and too cold to hold. The client suggested the sandwich would be cut in half. I agreed. The chef was pissed, but she did it anyway, and then put out the new half-size sandwiches. In the next 10 minutes, 4 more sandwiches were done. The client, irate, suggested toothpicks. And this is when I went into the husband's office and selected a gun. I put it in my right apron pocket. And then I calmly went to the bullet display to select the bullet that I took 2, dropped them in the left pocket of my apron, and returned to the kitchen. Before asking the chef to apply the toothpicks, I sighed. She applied them unhappily, saying, "These look like shit." I then went to the bathroom. I took a newspaper with me and sat in the toilet. I had 2 bullets and 1 gun, but I had no idea how to make them work together. But it was more intuitive than I thought it would be, and the bullets fit, sort of. I read an increasingly irrelevant Brooke Tellender column about student athletes, put my maybe loaded weapon in my apron, and went back to the party. The client did not like the way the toothpicks looked. She says, "This is not the 4th of July." Meanwhile, I had a maybe loaded antique gun in my apron. And the client had a new suggestion right away. Cut them again. I held the gun and uttered what I wished were my last words. If we cut it anymore, we will jeopardize the integrity of the While I awaited the client's response, I knew that I had a gun in my hand and could blow my brains out all over her white carpet. I put the gun to my head and pulled the trigger, but the firing pin had been long removed. My head should have exploded. Her yammering face should have become alarmingly startled. My head should have been emptied onto her white carpet. Someone should have then said, "Man, brain blood is a bitch to get out." But none of this happened. Well, most of it did. There were guns in cases and bullets displayed like butterflies, but they stayed behind glass and did not enter apron pockets. But when I uttered those words, I reached into my apron pocket, wishing that they were there. I did not put a gun to my head and attempt to blow my brains out in front of the client, but I want to be clear. That is what I wanted to happen. The truth is that I said, if we cut it anymore, we will jeopardize the And the client looked at me, she fluttered her eyes, looked away, sighed, and said, "You're right." When I started dying, I was not in Wilmette, but alone in my crap shack apartment in Chicago waiting for an Italian beef sandwich to arrive. Other things were arriving too, but I really only cared about the sandwich. I imagined how I would eat it, removing half of the meat, then eating the juice-soaked bread, picking up small pieces of meat and jardinera with each bite until all that was left was a mess of thinly sliced beef. I would dive in and look for more bread. I would find some, and then I would find none. Meat would remain, but the sandwich would be gone. I didn't know I was dying. I felt awful, but I always felt awful. I felt sick, but I always felt sick. As my heart began to slow, I thought about that sandwich in Wilmette falling from old fingers. I remembered the looks people gave the waiters as they cleaned them off the white carpet. They looked at the sandwich like it was at fault, like the sandwich had tricked them. Thank you.